One of my favorite ways to do original research is to run your own experiments. It's really hard for other people to totally rip that off. I mean, they'd have to, again, run their own experiment. It's really awesome, unique, original content to add to your website. But experimentation can seem really, really intimidating if you don't have like a strong science background. So today, I want to explain to you just how simple it can be and give you several examples of what you could do on your own blog. Experiments are really useful on content, not necessarily the whole blog doesn't have to be about this, but on content that has any sort of product relationship. It doesn't have to be a product review, just there's a product involved, right? Or if there's like a methodology that can be tested. So if there's, again, a methodology that you're teaching, in our case, teaching how to write great blog posts is a methodology. And so we're able to do experimentation. Our experimentation for that usually takes a long time because it takes so long for blog posts to rank. But there are a lot of methodologies where you could run kind of a few different variants upon a methodology that's out there and just see how the outcomes differ, and then use that data, use that information to inform your blog post. It's awesome. And it makes your content really, really, really valuable. So on the product side, it really doesn't have to be a product review. Let me give you a couple of examples of experiments that you could run that don't necessarily require it to be a product review. Here's one that we saw actually a little while back in a contest that we did. Somebody was writing an article about how much electricity do 3D printers use. He has a home 3D printer. The whole website's about 3D printing. It's a great response post question. And you could just go look at the specs and see what it says, its usages, but that's not that helpful. Anyone can look at that, and practically speaking, it's not actually going to be that accurate. Instead, what he did was he set up about a 1-hour job for the 3D printer to do. And then instead of plugging the 3D printer directly into the wall, he plugged it into basically an electric meter. And then you plug that meter into the wall. They're a fairly inexpensive tool that you can get to measure the electrical usage of something. And then he took readings off of that over the course of the 1-hour job. And in the end, he had this awesome data table full of just basically how much energy usage was being used at each time, and therefore over the course of the entire 1-hour job, about how much electricity was used by the 3D printer. Then he compared that to other regular household appliances to say, a 3D printer kind of falls somewhere between, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like, just say like a toaster and a microwave, right? Like microwaves use quite a bit, but toasters use almost nothing at all, and this is kind of in the middle. That was awesome. It answers the question very, very well, and it's going to be a more authoritative response than someone who just lists the manufacturer's spec. Here's another example of one you could do, and this is both product and methodology. You could do some, like if you had a blog about fishing. Product-wise, it could be, I put this much weight on the end of the fishing line, and I tried out 4 different reels that I have used and that I like. And I cast each one 10 times, and I used about the same cast each time. And I actually found that this particular reel, I was able to cast it 20% farther. That would be a cool test. That's product related, right? But along the same lines, you could have, here's a few different methodologies of casting that I use. Maybe an overhand, maybe kind of a sidearm, whatever. Maybe you have a few different techniques that you use, and you show that, based on the different techniques, the weight went different distances, or the weight went about different heights, and you could find a way to measure that. You could do the same thing with testing different baits, right? And give yourself an excuse to go fishing for a few days, and you test out different baits in the same place. Again, kind of randomizing which bait you use at any given time so that it's a reasonable study to do. And in the end, you'll determine that, for catching this kind of fish in this particular area, this was the best bait. That's how we run experiments. Let me give you a list of several other different types of experiments that you could run for your blog posts. The first would be an accuracy test. For a lot of different products, some kind of accuracy would be important for people. We, not too long ago, did a test of a whole bunch of different RGB lights. There's a little lights we use. It's actually, I got one right here. It's what's casting the blue light behind me. It's this little cool light here. We tested these RGB lights, and there's several apps out there that will help you or that will directly measure the color temperature of light. And the color temperature is just like how blue or how orange is the light, how cold versus how warm is it. And so we set them all to the same color temperature, And then we measured them all using an app on our phone. And we could see just how far off they were. And we took 2 or 3 different measurements using different apps. And in the end, we were able to see how accurate each light was. If that matters to you, that's part of our review, and it's going to be very helpful. We did the same thing with color, just how accurate was the color measurement. On those RGB lights, we were able to test battery life. We just set them all to 100%, then we set them all to the same brightness, and let them sit there until they ran out. We just put a camera on them so that we could come back later and just kind of scrub through and then look at the timestamp of when each one went out. So we didn't have to stand there and watch them and write it down. We were able to just leave the room and let the experiment run itself. So battery life is a really, really good one on electronics. I mentioned energy usage in an example I gave before. Energy usage can be a great one, again, for any type of appliance or electronic device. How much power is being used is a great thing to measure. Again, even if energy usage isn't something that your blog is about, it's a question that many people are going to be likely to search for many different products. So it's a really good one to cover and to run your own experiment on. Durability and build quality. Now this one can seem like it would get really expensive because torture testing something is one of the best ways to measure how durable it is. However, that doesn't have to be what you do. In fact, we find that when we get products we like, whenever possible, especially with the expensive ones, to be able to use them for a lot of different pieces of content. And then when we're done, we just kind of sell them off at anywhere from 50 to 75% of the price we paid for them. Whoever buys them from us gets a discount on a product that wasn't used that heavily, and we're able to recoup a lot of the cost of doing those product reviews. It's a great way to do it without spending as much money as you think you might have to spend. But for durability and build quality, a lot of times there's a lot you can tell just by handling the product. With the RGB lights, I mean, some of them just felt like cheap plastic, and some of them feel rigid, like, man, if I drop this thing, it's gonna be fine. We just dropped them a few times, maybe it's a hard floor, but there's a rug above it so they wouldn't get so scratched and dinged up. But so we could just make sure that they were reasonably impact resistant. They didn't break, so we were able to do some build quality testing. The next two also go hand in hand. Ease of use and features. So ease of use is just, again, how easy is this product to use? With the RGB lights, and that was an easy one to test. Some of them, you turn them on, and in order to find how to change it to a certain color of light, it takes like 5 minutes. And some of them, you turn them on and it's super intuitive, it takes like 3 clicks. A couple of them even have apps. One of them actually has a useful app where you could set the color on your phone and just say, go, and the light changes. You can do all sorts of cool things with it through the app that none of them would be able to do with the tiny little LCD screen that they have for their menu. So ease of use is another easy one to test. It's pretty subjective, but it's a great way to compare products. Features is another one where, the manufacturer is going to list out the features on their spec sheet, right? And so that information is available online. What's not necessarily readily available is how good are those features? So with the RGB lights, a lot of them have neat features that will allow you to make the effect of like a flickering candle or lightning or an ambulance, the blue and the red lights behind you. It can be really, really cool. However, some of them, they look really crummy. You would never believe that was a candle or a fire, right? Some of them look really, really good. Some of them they're there, but they're really hard to use. These are all things you can cover on your site if you take the time to actually work with and experiment with a product. And then lastly, a cost comparison is just a great thing to add. Now, this is something that's easy to find that information online. So it's not something that requires an experiment, but if you're ever comparing products, as we talk about in another lesson, we talk about the different kinds of posts. Whenever you're gonna compare products, cost needs to become a factor. What we find oftentimes is we like to run our own experiments and make our own decision about which of the products is our favorite one without considering the cost. And then we add the cost in and let that kind of reshuffle. So we'll end up with sort of 2 lists. One that's just kind of our ranking without cost in mind, and one with our ranking with cost in mind. And oftentimes, the list doesn't change that much, meaning that in many cases, paying more doesn't actually get you a better product. So that's always really, really interesting when you do find that. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes you find that you really do get what you pay for. And so when you put cost into account, you realize that kind of the middle of the road products end up being the recommendation. With the RGB lights, we found that one of the least expensive lights was our favorite one. And our second favorite one was one of the most expensive lights. And really what you got for that added price? a little bit more accuracy of color, slight, and a really good app. Which, if those are the things that matter to you, you would be willing to pay the extra $100 for. But for most people, we were able to recommend a far less expensive light because it was the better light in almost every other criterion, including battery life. It lasts like twice as long as all the others. Super awesome. So you can see why experiments could be a great way to do original research, create unique content, and be able to create the type of content that other people are going to struggle to replicate unless they can show that they did the same kind of experiment. When you do experiments, make sure that you at least pull out your cell phone and take some pictures of doing the experiment. That's going to add additional credibility and make it way harder for other people to be able to replicate or steal and make it look nearly as authoritative as the work that you did.